scene when he walked into that bedroom was like evil preying on innocence.
They gave up. They gave up on the case. You had to get someone to pay attention to you. So the phone was my tool to annoy them.
She became so driven to finish this.
It was her persistence, her tenacity. She wasn't going to let this go.
This crime got solved because of Sheila.
My name is Sheila Wysocki. In 1984, I was a college student in Dallas, Texas, Southern Methodist University. Angie Samota and I were college roommates our freshman year. Angie was everything that you would want it in a friend or a daughter. She was bright, engaging. She was beautiful. And she had a way about her eyes and her smile. She would come into a room and you knew she was there. So her sophomore year, she decided that she wanted to get an apartment on her own. By that time, she had met her boyfriend. They hit it off immediately. Angie was so outgoing and vivacious, and Ben was very quiet and introverted. Friday the 12th, she and her girlfriend planned to go out that evening and with a guy that Angie had met at a mixer, and his name's Russell. He was an architect. Angie did invite Ben to go along that night, but he had to work the next day. So they went to all the local bars in the area that were very popular back then. And they danced and, drank and had a great time. And then when it was over, Angie decided to drop off Russell. And then she dropped off her girlfriend and then went back to her condominium. And then around 1:30 that evening, Ben's phone rings, and it was Angie on the other line, and she said, "Talk to me." And he hears something in the background, and he said, "Who's there?" And she said, "It's a strange man." And then she says, "I have to go." And the phone goes dead. He knew something was wrong. Ben waited a few minutes to see if she was going to call back, and then got dressed and got into his car. And back in 1984, we didn't have cell phones, but he was one of the cool guys who had a phone in his car. Of course, it was the size of a dashboard, but he had it, and he kept calling her place on the way over there. And when he got there, he went upstairs and he knocked at the door, then knocked again and went to his car and dialed her number. And he could hear it ringing up there, so he knew the phone was working. And after that, that's when he called the Dallas Police Department.
When the police arrived, Ben was still there. And when the police got the key to the front door and made entry, they allowed Ben to go inside with them. The first thing that one of the officers saw was a single female shoe laying there in the living room, just by itself. They split up, and shortly thereafter, one officer found Angie lying in her bed. The police officer said the scene when he walked into that bedroom was like evil preying on innocence. Angie was just covered in blood, in an incredible pool of blood, and she had been stabbed repeatedly. It was 18 separate stab wounds, some of them so deep that they actually went completely through Angie's heart. I think the natural thought was that she had been raped. And he checked Angie's pulse to see if maybe there was a sign of life, and there was not. They came out and told Ben, and they described Ben got very quiet, and I think he sensed that something very terrible had happened to her.
I was home, and I had just walked in, and the telephone was ringing, and it was a close friend of mine, and she told me that there's been an accident, and my girlfriend was crying, and I kept saying, "Is she okay?" And I remember screaming, "Is she okay?" And she said no, and I said, "Is she dead?" And she was crying so much, I was like, "Answer me, is she dead?" And I said, "How did she die?" And she said, "I don't know." So she said, "Here's the phone number for the Dallas police. They've asked us to call anybody who knew her, and they know that you and another girlfriend were best friends, and that you need to call."
Once word got out, it spread like wildfire, throughout the SMU campus and community. And people, I think, immediately wanted this solved.
The initial contact I had with the police was by telephone, and they said that they were setting up interviews and they wanted people to come down. So I went down there. The lead detective on the case was Virgil Sparks. I walk into a room, and it was a desk, and they have the photos out there. So that's the first time I had seen her body and the autopsy pictures. Paralyzing is the only word I can use. There was a picture of her on the bed, dead, with blood and her eyes open. And even to this day, it brings chills, because that moment was taking my breath away. It kind of was one of those out-of-body experiences of, I need to get out of this place, and I want to get out of this place right now.
So the initial thoughts were that it was not a break-in, that it was someone probably close to Angie, someone that she knew that she let in the apartment. And in this case, with Angie being stabbed 18 times, someone that was potentially angry.
And that's what I believed. It was someone she knew. It was obviously a rape gone bad, and they had several suspects. The initial group of boys that were suspects, first one was Angie's ex-boyfriend. The next one was her current boyfriend, Ben. The other suspect was Russell, who was the last known male to see her that night. When I heard the news, I thought I knew exactly who had murdered her, and I thought it was her ex-boyfriend. The summer before the sophomore year, I got a call from her one night that he had pulled a knife, and we had to call the police. I just knew that he had killed her.
But as they investigated him, they were able to confirm that he was working the night that Angie was murdered.
The police had narrowed it down to two, Ben and Russell. And that's when I started meeting with Detective Sparks and talking about what needed to be done. I'm a pretty nosy person, and I knew her routine. I knew her boyfriend. I knew Russell. So I was able to convey to the police what her thoughts were, speaking for her without her being there. Actually, I met Detective Sparks at bars, and we would meet and talk about the case. He basically asked me to become familiar with the stories that they had, to see if they lined up with the stories he had. Ben, I would ask him questions. Russell, I would ask him questions, and then I would tell Sparks what I found out. The reason that Ben was a suspect is because he was the one who called it in. The police perceived him as indifferent, and that made them very suspicious. They felt like the 911 call was not very panicky.
What's the problem, sir?
My girlfriend called me, said there was a man in her apartment using the bathroom and the phone, and now I cannot get her to answer the phone. Her car's here and she won't answer the door, can't answer the door.
And then he was non-emotional at the crime scene. They thought she went out with Russell that night and he got jealous.
And that he went over there and in a fit of rage stabbed her 18 times. So they questioned Ben. He gave them a statement. He gave them a blood sample and a saliva sample.
They didn't have DNA, so they did swabs, and there were secretors and non-secretors.
And a secretor is basically a person who secretes blood-type antigens into their body fluids, like saliva and semen.
The person that murdered her was a non-secretor.
When they got the results back from Ben, he was a secretor. So that at least eliminated him as a suspect at that point. And so that basically left Russell Buchanan as the primary suspect.
They felt like he had walked back to her condo, knocked at the door, and when she turned him down for sex, raped her and went crazy. They zeroed in on Russell Buchanan. Now, how do we get him? They told me Russell had murdered her. That night that Russell and Angie went out, he was dropped off, then he left town for Houston. They couldn't find him right after the murder, which was suspicious to them. From the police perspective, it was a fleeing. He had left, and there were no signs of him anywhere. They had to wait 2 days when he came back from a wedding.
They were able to verify that he had traveled to Houston. That next morning he had to catch a flight, and he was in a wedding, but they still strongly suspected him. They could not eliminate Russell as a possible suspect.
So Russell returns from his trip from Houston. There's a knock at the door, And he opens it, and there are police with guns drawn, and they were yelling at him, "Are you Russell Buchanan?"
He gave them a statement. He gave them a blood and a saliva sample just like Ben had done. The fact that he was a non-secretor, he could not be eliminated as a suspect.
Detective Sparks told me, we don't believe Russell. We believe he's lying. I had such a knot in my stomach when I was around him, and they kept saying, that's your intuition telling you he's the guy. So we set up a time where I called Russell, and I said, how about if we go to this Chinese restaurant in North Dallas? And I said, is this guy going to end up pulling a knife on me and stabbing me? He goes, no, it was probably a one-time killing, and you're going to be in a public area. Don't worry about it. He had picked me up from my house, and so I drive to the location with him, asking him questions about the evening. We go through dinner, and I'm asking him questions about the evening again. And I'm driving home, and I remember looking at his profile, and I'm thinking, it's just not making sense to me. But this man murdered my roommate. After I had had dinner with Russell, Detective Sparks started tailing him and following him to work and picking him up after work and interrogating him. He said that he would be at a stoplight and he would pull up next to Russell just to let him know he was still following him. He was in pursuit of Russell. And then they would pull him in at night after work for interviews, and they constantly interviewed him. And they would show him those photos and, tell him that he did that. And then at one point I was told that he got this real high-powered attorney. He lawyered up, and, most guilty people lawyer up. And then I was told that they couldn't touch him anymore. So with all that evidence stacking up, it was Russell. And then Russell leaves the country. And to me, that's a flight. He's out of here. So of course he did it.
When Russell Buchanan moved overseas, I think that did nothing more than, in the detectives' minds, confirm that that's my guy.
The police really kept saying, well, he's gone. We've got to close the case. Our suspect's gone, and we're never going to get him back.
I think in the summer of '85, 9 or 10 months worth of investigating, the lead detective finally had to suspend the investigation. The best he had at that time was that it was Russell Buchanan, but there was not enough physical evidence.
They gave up. They gave up on the case. I did not understand, why can you not get this guy? You know who it is. Charge him. Let's get this guy in jail, because even though you say he's never going to do it again, what if he does? That was very upsetting to me. I want people to receive their justice, and I wanted him behind bars. Angie's murder changed my life completely. My safe world that I had was no longer safe. There were bad people out there, very evil people that would rape someone, and on top of that, brutally murder someone. What a horrible way to die. And so I didn't finish college. I walked away, probably never even withdrew. I got married in 1988. I moved to Tennessee and had my boys, and life went on. So the case to me at that point was over. There was nothing I thought I could do from Nashville area. In 2004, I was taking a Bible study class and I was doing homework. The entire house was quiet, which is unusual for our household. And I look up and there's a vision. And it is the vision of Angie the first time I ever saw her, with her smile and it exactly the way I remember her. And I can see it as, there she was. And it was 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and it was gone. No talking, no anything. It was the craziest thing. And it's one of those things you don't talk about at the dinner table that night. And I remember putting my pen down and going, it's time. I need to make a phone call. She's telling me it's time. So in 2004, I start calling the Dallas police, and I started with the original investigator, Virgil Sparks. He knew me, didn't get a call back, called him again. After 50 messages, he still did not call me back. So when Virgil dried up, I started making calls back to the homicide division. What I gained from that first conversation was nobody had called in 20 years. Nobody. That's a forgotten person. Now, how can you take such a beautiful life and such a vivacious person and forget her? I knew from just watching TV, you have a file, you have evidence, let's just get that out in front of someone's eyes. You needed someone competent to relook at the investigation. And that's what I was trying to do. Back in 1984, they had made a determination it was Russell Buchanan that murdered her. Russell was the prime suspect still. In 2004, we had several things available to us. First of all, DNA. I knew that they could figure out who did something based on sperm. We had sperm. We had fingernails and we had sperm. So that DNA thing was huge to me.
2004, 2005, 2006. And so phone calls would come in, and I'm sure Sheila talked to several different detectives, several different departments within the Dallas Police Department. She'll tell you that she called and she called and she called.
My mom is very eccentric. She's very outgoing. She's a very motivated individual. No is not her favorite word.
You had to get someone to pay attention to you. You can't just make one call. They're not going to pay attention to you. So the phone was my tool to annoy them and annoy them and annoy them.
And unfortunately, at the time, she was a private citizen. She was just a mom from Tennessee. And so the Dallas Police Department kind of brushed her off. And maybe worse than saying no is to just completely disregard and underestimate her.
I am not one to let something go. I'm like a dog with a bone. So I thought, okay, I'm going to call you tomorrow, and I'm going to call after that. And you know what? I may call twice in one day and maybe 5 times in one day just to see if they would tell me something different. I made over 700 phone calls during that period. What they were telling me was the evidence was lost. The evidence was lost in a flood. They couldn't find the evidence. I can't tell you how many times I heard they did not have the evidence. And something told me that's not true.
I mean, she is saying that they made mistakes that could have solved the case. And if you're telling an organization that their predecessors made mistakes, you're not going to get the best reception. She was going in there and she was saying, I can do this better than you can.
At that point in time, the Dallas Police Department didn't have a cold case squad. They didn't have the funding for it, so they had homicide detectives who were engaged in handling murder cases of the present. And that number is staggering. It's in the hundreds.
They are overrunning with cold cases. They don't have the manpower, and they have murders going on every day. I'm sure it wasn't a top priority for them.
What really kind of broke the case for her was one day she calls in and she was put on the phone with a rookie.
I was like, well, you've got to have records of what was lost in that flood. I mean, somewhere you have records. And at one point I said, well, I'm coming to Dallas. How about if I go through the basement with you and let's do that? The rookie said, well, I don't know if that evidence is actually lost. In fact, the evidence was not lost. In fact, they had evidence and that they could get a hold of it. And when he told me that and that they still had it, I was like, yes. That little carrot that he dangled was all I needed. The rookie was new in the division. He goes, well, let me talk to my sergeant and I'll call you back. That phone call never happened. And I knew I had gotten that little carrot.
This is the first time that she hasn't been either shut down completely, just told no, or gotten some type of a negative response.
Where I live now, it's a gated community with security. And I was complaining to the head of the security division. I said, I've got this case in Dallas, and I explained it was my roommate. I really wanted to get it solved. I said, what do you recommend? And he goes, oh, you'd be perfect as a private investigator.
And so that's when she decided to become a private investigator.
As a PI, you have access to records that you would not normally have as a private citizen. I wanted to pass this test more than anything at that point in my life. My son, Charlie, we got the little booklets that you get, and I'm like, okay, you have to read this to me. I need to pass this test. It's 20-something years since I've been out of college. Let's get this done.
She had me studying with her for probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I just remember the last night before she went and took the test, we sat there and we read through that entire 37-page book, and it took 6 hours.
And I passed the test. He says he passed the test. I passed the test.
I felt like I had passed the test, yes. She took it for me, but I was definitely there taking it too.
I thought when I got my little PI card that when I called the Dallas police that time, they would open up everything to me. They would say, here's all the evidence I have for you, and go solve it. That was not the case. All it did was to tell him I'm not going away. So after I got my license, I continued to call the police department, trying to get them to open the case or talk to me about the case. And it was hundreds of calls.
I mean, as much as I appreciate exactly what she did, I have to kind of feel a little bit of sympathy for those poor officers who had to answer those phone calls and just say no, which is a very hard thing to do to her.
And so while I'm annoying the Dallas police, I'm also working the other areas, trying to get other evidence on Russell. I still believed it was Russell who had murdered her. You know, now I have my PI license. I can find out what he's doing now, where he is. You know, had he murdered anybody else? Are there any other crimes out there? You know, he comes up clean. One of the things actually I started in 2005 is tracing all the assaults and unsolved murders. And I took a map and I mapped out the unsolved murders that happened and how many assaults were in that area and how many assaults were rape, and tried to come up with a pattern.
She became so driven to finish this that it was shocking. She turned our study into kind of a war room. It was kind of a controlled chaos because she had everything spread out, but she knew exactly where everything was, and she could easily have found anything should she have needed it.
At some point in time, the Dallas Police Department finally dedicated 2 detectives and called them the Cold Case Unit. 2 detectives to start working on hundreds of cases. One of the 2 detectives who was assigned to that Cold Case Unit was Linda Crum. By Sheila calling and calling, that caused Angie's case to be pulled out of the cold case room and allowed that case to get the attention it deserves.
One day I received a phone call from them, which was unusual. And it was a detective, and she said that she had the file and she was looking over the case. I loved Linda Crum. She was smart, she was detailed and very thorough, and she could get the evidence. And that was the moment that, talking to her, I felt like, I think we might get this.
First thing she did do was call the crime lab on the outside chance that there would be some DNA evidence over there that might potentially be tested. I don't think she had a prayer that there would be anything over there. But when they said, yes, we do have some physical evidence, we still preserved the swabs and the smears from the rape kit 24 years later, I think everybody got very, very excited.
And I said, great, can we send it off for DNA testing? And it took forever. During that time, I'm still calling people and trying to, keep up with Russell because we're about to nail him. And finding out that he's living the good life as an architect, he's well respected, which I couldn't understand since he had murdered someone.
And they took that DNA profile and uploaded it into a database. And lo and behold, that database provided a match of that DNA.
A phone call comes in, and she said, this is Linda Crum from the Dallas Police. And I remember grabbing the door, and she said, we got him. Now, when she said we got him, the next words I expected her to say was Russell Buchanan, and she didn't. She said it was a serial rapist named Donald Bess. And I had never heard of him, who he was, nothing. His name never came up in the 20 plus years. So I get his name and I immediately go online. And that's where I find out who he is. Donald Bess was on parole when he murdered Angie. So it was the most random act out there.
And to their amazement, he was sitting in prison on a life sentence for a aggravated sexual assault that he committed 7 months after Angie's death.
His 6th rape, if you include Angie. I mean, that is disgusting. There's no other way to say that. I mean, and he was about to be paroled again.
Everybody was, I think, shocked, mainly because it seemed very contrary to the theories that the detectives believed based on the crime scene, just the viciousness of the attack caused the police never to think that this was going to end up being a total stranger that committed this crime.
I couldn't comprehend that it wasn't Russell Buchanan, because I've been told 20 years ago it was Russell.
I got a phone call from the Dallas Police Department, a detective, who contacted me to let me know that the perpetrator of the Angie Samota murder had been found, and that he wanted to offer an apology on behalf of the police department. I was completely unaware that I was considered a prime suspect. I could have been sitting in prison for a crime that I didn't commit. I was relieved. Relieved for myself, sure, but I was also relieved really for the family, probably more than anybody else, that this unsolved case could really be resolved.
So that night of October 13th, Angie went back to her condominium. Probably 10 minutes after she got there, there's a knock at the door. And this beast of a human being is standing there. He weighs 285 pounds. He's 6'3", and he steps into her condo.
And then Donald Andrew Bess asks for a drink of water and the phone.
And he goes down the hallway, and she goes into the opposite direction to where the phone was. And she picks up the phone and dials Ben's number and said, "Talk to me."
I think that is when Donald Andrew Bess had kind of made his rounds through her apartment to confirm that she was alone.
And he picked up a knife.
And then he confronted her.
And he drags her into the bedroom and raped her. Donald Bess covers her mouth, and he starts stabbing her so she doesn't scream. And he goes into the bathroom, washes his hands, takes a towel, takes the knife, and he walks out into the night. When Donald Bess walked into the courtroom, all the oxygen was sucked out. You could not breathe. He was the purest of evil I've ever been near. When the lead detective went down to the prison to interview Donald Bess, he stated, all women are. Well, when that was testified in court, I had my notepad during the trial, and I wrote, well, this just put you in the chair.
On Monday, June the 14th, the jury sentenced Donald Andrew Bess to death.
I've thought a lot about how close I came to being charged with this crime. It's my understanding I was one circumstance away, which is an unbelievable feeling for me.
I recently met with Russell, and we went over from start to finish everything that we went through, and I asked him for forgiveness.
This crime got solved because of Sheila. She kept this monster off the streets. She deserves all the credit.
It was her persistence, her tenacity. She wasn't going to let this go.
I thought I was going to have some sort of closure. At least we know who it is, and that is good. And he's not going to harm anybody else. It doesn't change the facts. It was horrible, and what he did was horrible. I don't feel closure. I don't feel good. Still dead. Closure's not the word I would use, but it gives me some sort of peace and justice. I think the biggest thing is justice.